Too big, too close, Anna Weiss whispered under her breath, the words barely forming as the truck door slammed open and Texas sunlight flooded in, harsh and blinding, the kind of light that erased shadows and left nowhere to hide, the air thick at 104 degrees, pressing against skin like something alive. She stepped down slowly, boots hitting dry dirt, and that was when she saw them, the men waiting beyond the fence line, tall, broad-shouldered, hats low over their eyes, figures carved out of heat and dust, nothing like the men she had known back home, not the students who once filled her classroom, not the soldiers who marched past her hospital ward. These men were different, larger in every visible way, their presence filling the space without movement, without effort, and every instinct she had told her the same thing: danger, keep your distance, don't look too long, don't draw attention. The other women felt it too. You could see it in the way their shoulders stiffened, the way their hands stayed close to their sides. No one spoke, no one dared, because they had been told stories, stories repeated so often they had hardened into truth, that American men were loud, unpredictable, ruled by impulse, that captivity meant humiliation, that power would always be shown, loudly, clearly, without restraint. Anna lowered her eyes as one of the cowboys stepped forward, his boots slow against the dirt, the sound deliberate but not threatening. She waited for the voice, the order. The first sharp word that would confirm everything she believed, but it never came. Instead he stopped a few feet away, not close enough to invade, not far enough to ignore, and then, without a word, he stepped slightly to the side, just enough to clear a path, as if making space for them rather than taking it, the gesture so small it almost went unnoticed. But Anna saw it, she noticed everything, the way he didn't stare, didn't scan them the way soldiers often did, didn't let his gaze linger where it shouldn't. His eyes moved past them, not dismissive, not cold, just controlled, and that was the first fracture, barely visible, but real, the kind that doesn't break something immediately, just weakens it from within. They were led toward the ranch, the land stretching wide and endless, wooden fences cutting through open fields, the smell of dry grass and leather carried in the wind, and the men moved around them, working, lifting, adjusting saddles, their movements efficient, practiced, but quiet, always quiet, no shouting, no barking of orders, just the low rhythm of labor, boots, tools, breath. Anna kept waiting for it, the moment when the mask would slip, when the size, the strength, the presence would turn into something else, something harsher, something she understood. But it didn't come, and as she walked past the cowboy who had stepped aside, she risked one brief glance upward, just enough to see his face under the brim of his hat, unreadable, steady, and gone again in a second, and for reasons she could not explain, that unsettled her more than any threat could have, because this was not what she had been prepared for, not at all. The work began before the sun reached its highest point, the heat already settled into the ground like it had no intention of leaving, the air dry, carrying the faint smell of dust and livestock. Anna stood at the edge of the field with the others, waiting for instruction that never came in the way she expected. No shouted commands, no rigid formation, just a man pointing once, slow and clear, then returning to his own task as if explanation beyond that was unnecessary. They understood enough, rows of cotton stretched out in front of them, endless and repetitive, and so they moved. Hands working mechanically at first, backs bending under a sun that showed no mercy. Time passed without measure, only the rhythm of breath and movement marking it, and still, no one raised their voice, not even when one of the younger women misjudged her footing and stumbled slightly, dropping what she had gathered, the sound soft but enough to make everyone pause, a reflex, a moment where the past tried to reassert itself, expecting correction, expecting consequence. Anna felt it too, that tightening in the chest, the instinct to become smaller, less noticeable, but nothing came. No sharp word, no step forward to reprimand. Instead, she saw him again, the same man from earlier, Jack, though she did not know his name yet. He walked over without urgency, not slow, not fast, just steady. He bent down, picked up what had been dropped, brushed the dust away with a single motion, and handed it back, not meeting her eyes directly, not forcing acknowledgement, just returning it as if it had always belonged in her hands. Then he turned and walked back to his own work, no lesson delivered, no authority displayed. The moment ended before it could become something else, and that was what stayed with Anna, not what he did, but what he chose not to do, the absence of something she had expected with certainty, around her. The others resumed their tasks, quieter than before, as if each of them was recalculating something they could not yet name. The heat pressed down harder as the hours moved on, sweat tracing lines down her back, her hands beginning to ache from repetition, and still, the silence held, broken only by the natural sounds of labor, boots against soil, fabric shifting, the occasional creak of leather. At midday, a canteen was passed along the line, no ceremony, no hierarchy, just a simple gesture moving from one person to the next. When it reached Anna, she hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took it, the metal warm against her palm. She drank, the water not cold but enough to steady her. She handed it forward, watching as the same pattern continued, and then she saw it, Jack again, standing a few yards away. He had his own canteen, but instead of drinking first, he extended it toward one of the older women, waiting until she had taken a sip before lifting it to his own mouth. A small thing, almost nothing, but it shifted something deeper than the earlier moment. This was not restraint alone, this was choice, deliberate and quiet, and Anna felt the second fracture, larger this time, more difficult to ignore, because it was not about size anymore, not about the physical presence that had startled her when she first stepped off the truck. It was about something else entirely, something she had not been taught to expect, something that did not fit into the story she had carried across the ocean. And for the first time since arriving, she realized that she did not understand the rules of this place at all. The afternoon stretched longer than it should have, the sun refusing to move, hanging high above the fields like it was watching, measuring, testing, and the work did not slow, it only settled into a deeper rhythm, one that required less thought and more endurance. Anna's hands moved without instruction now, muscle memory forming where uncertainty had been, but her attention was elsewhere, not on the rows of cotton, not on the heat that pressed against her shoulders, but on the patterns she could not ignore, the way the men carried themselves when no one was watching, or when they thought no one was watching. There was no performance in it, no need to prove strength through noise or force, it simply existed, quiet and constant. She noticed how they lifted heavy loads without calling attention to it, how they paused when someone else passed nearby, adjusting their position slightly to avoid contact, not out of fear, but out of awareness, as if space itself mattered, as if respect could exist without being spoken. And this unsettled her more than anything else had so far, because it required her to reconsider something deeper than expectation. It required her to question what she had believed about power. Later, as the light began to shift, softening just slightly at the edges, a moment came that did not belong to the work at all. One of the other cowboys, younger, louder in the way he moved, said something she could not fully understand, his tone sharp, edged with something careless, the kind of sound she recognized, the kind that usually led somewhere predictable. Anna felt her body react before her mind could. A familiar tightening, a readiness to withdraw, to disappear into stillness, but before anything could unfold, there was a pause, not loud, not dramatic, just a break in the flow of movement. She looked up and saw Jack, not speaking, not stepping forward in any obvious way, just standing there, his gaze steady, directed not at the women, but at the other man, and something passed between them, something wordless and immediate. The younger cowboy shifted, his posture changing almost imperceptibly, the edge in his tone gone when he spoke again, softer this time, neutral, as if corrected without instruction. And that was the moment that stayed, not because of what was said, but because nothing had to be said at all. Authority existed, but it did not need volume, it did not need to announce itself, it only needed to be recognized, and it was, instantly, completely. Anna felt it settle into her understanding like a weight finding its place. This was something she had not seen before, not in this form, not this controlled, not this precise. As the work resumed and the moment passed as if it had never happened, she realized that what had first appeared as size, as physical difference, had been something else entirely, something quieter and far more difficult to define. It was not in their height or their strength, though those were obvious. It was in what they chose not to do with it, the restraint, the space they allowed. The way they moved through power without using it unnecessarily. And for the first time since she had stepped onto this land, Anna felt something shift inside her that was not fear, not confusion, but the beginning of understanding, fragile and incomplete, but real enough that it could not be ignored. Evening did not arrive all at once, it came slowly, the light thinning across the fields, turning sharp edges into something softer, something almost forgiving, and with it, the work began to ease. Not stopping, never fully stopping, but loosening its grip on the body, Anna straightened her back for the first time in what felt like hours, the muscles in her shoulders protesting the movement, and she looked out across the land again, the same endless stretch that had felt overwhelming that morning now carrying a different weight, not lighter, but understood in a way it had not been before. Around her, the others moved more quietly now, fatigue settling in, but also something else. Something unspoken that passed between them in brief glances and small pauses, as if each of them had noticed the same things but did not yet have the words to name them. A truck engine started somewhere in the distance, low and steady, a reminder that the day had an end, even if it came slowly. Anna stepped aside from the row she had been working, her hands still, her breathing steadying as she adjusted to standing upright again. And that was when she saw him once more, Jack, near the fence line, coiling a length of rope with practiced ease, his movements unhurried, precise, as if time itself moved differently around him. She watched the way he worked, not because she intended to, but because her attention kept returning there, drawn by something she could not yet explain. He finished with the rope, set it aside, and reached for his gloves, worn leather, shaped by use. He removed them slowly, flexing his fingers once before placing them on the fence post, a simple action, ordinary, but there was a care in it, a deliberate quality that suggested even the smallest things were done with intention. Anna realized then that nothing she had seen that day had been careless, not the way they moved, not the way they spoke, not even the way they chose silence. It was all controlled, all measured, and that control was not for show, it was for something else, something internal, something that did not require witnesses. A sound broke her thoughts, a faint clatter as one of the younger women struggled to lift a bucket that had been filled too quickly, too heavily. She tried once, then again, her arms shaking slightly with the effort. Anna took a step forward without thinking, but stopped, unsure. The rules here were still unclear. Help had not been assigned, nothing had been explained, and hesitation held her in place for just a second too long. Then Jack moved, not rushing, not correcting, just stepping into the space between effort and failure. He lifted the bucket with one hand, steady and easy, then set it down closer to where it needed to be. He did not take over, did not remove the task entirely, he only adjusted it, made it possible, then stepped back, returning the space to her. The girl nodded once, a small, almost invisible gesture, and continued, this time without struggle. And again, no words were exchanged, nothing acknowledged out loud, but something had passed between them, something clear enough that it did not need to be spoken. Anna felt it again, that shift, deeper now, more defined. This was not kindness in the way she had understood it before, not something soft or obvious. It was structured, intentional. It respected boundaries while still offering support. It did not diminish. It did not draw attention to itself. It simply existed where it was needed and then disappeared. As the last light of the day stretched across the field, casting long shadows that moved slowly with the setting sun, Anna understood something she had not been able to grasp earlier, something that had been forming quietly beneath each moment she had observed. These men did not need to show their strength, because they were not afraid of losing it, and that, more than anything she had seen, was what made them different, what made them feel larger in a way that had nothing to do with size at all. And as she stood there, the air cooling slightly for the first time since morning, she realized that whatever she had expected to find here had already begun to fall away, replaced by something she had not been prepared for, something she was only just beginning to understand. The ride back came in near silence, the truck moving slower now, tires pressing into the dry Texas road as the last light of day slipped behind the horizon, the sky stretching wide in shades of orange fading into blue. Anna sat with the others in the back, hands resting loosely in her lap, no longer tense in the way they had been that morning, the air cooler now, carrying the faint relief of evening, but her thoughts remained fixed on the day, replaying moments not in order, but in fragments, small details that refused to settle into something simple. Across from her, one of the younger women leaned her head back against the wooden side of the truck, eyes closed, breathing steady, exhaustion clear but not heavy, not burdened in the way exhaustion had felt before. It was different here. Anna could feel that difference even if she could not yet explain it. When the truck came to a stop near the barracks, no one rushed to move, there was no urgency, no command pushing them forward. They stepped down one by one, boots touching ground with quiet finality, the day complete without announcement. Anna lingered for a moment longer than the others, her eyes shifting toward the edge of the yard where the cowboys had remained, finishing their own tasks without pause. Jack stood near the fence again, his hat low, his figure partially shadowed now, the light almost gone. He lifted a canteen, took a measured drink, then set it down beside him. Nothing dramatic, nothing meant to be seen, and yet she saw it, the same pattern, the same restraint, the same quiet certainty in every movement. It was not something performed for others, it was something that existed regardless of who was watching, and that realization stayed with her as she turned and followed the others inside. The barracks smelled faintly of wood and fabric, simple, clean, the air still holding the warmth of the day. The women settled into their spaces without much conversation, each of them carrying something internal, something unspoken. Anna sat on the edge of her bunk, her hands resting on her knees, and for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to think without interruption. Back home, she remembered how strength had often been shown through volume, through presence that demanded attention, how authority had needed to be heard to be believed, but here, it was different. Here, it existed in what was not done, in the space given, in the control maintained even when it was not required. She thought of the moment in the field, the dropped bundle, the lack of reaction, the simple correction. She thought of the water passed without priority, the quiet adjustment of effort, the look that had changed another man's tone without a single word spoken. These were not isolated actions, they were consistent, deliberate, and that consistency made them impossible to ignore. Anna leaned back slightly, her gaze lifting to the ceiling as shadows from the single overhead light moved gently with the shifting air, and she understood now why the first sight of them had felt so overwhelming. It had not been fear alone, it had been the recognition of something unfamiliar, something she had not been taught to expect, something that did not fit into the framework she had carried with her. And now, that framework was beginning to crack, not all at once, not completely, but enough that it could no longer hold everything in place. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to hold on to the thought before it disappeared, and in that quiet space, one realization settled clearly, steady and undeniable. They did not need to prove anything, and that was why they felt larger than anything she had known before. Morning returned without announcement, the light slipping through the thin windows of the barracks before anyone spoke, before anyone moved, a quiet presence that filled the room slowly. Anna opened her eyes to it, not abruptly, not with the tension she had expected the night before, but with a steady awareness that felt unfamiliar in this place. For a moment she remained still, listening, the soft sound of breathing around her, the faint rustle of fabric as someone shifted on a bunk nearby. Nothing urgent, nothing forced, and that alone felt different. She sat up, her feet touching the wooden floor, cool now compared to the heat of the previous day, and as she stood, she realized something had changed, not in the environment, not in the routine that would follow, but in the way she anticipated it. The uncertainty had not disappeared, but it no longer pressed against her in the same way. Outside, the air carried a hint of early coolness. A brief window before the sun would reclaim everything. The truck waited where it had the day before, engine quiet, no one calling them forward. They approached on their own, one by one, climbing in without instruction. Anna took her place near the edge this time, not by accident, but by choice. The landscape unfolded again as they moved, the same wide stretch of land, the same fences, the same distant figures already at work. But it did not feel as overwhelming as it had before. Familiarity had begun to form, not comfort, but recognition, and recognition made space for something else, something steadier. When they arrived, the pattern repeated, the men already in motion. No need to begin because nothing had truly stopped. Anna stepped down, her boots pressing into the same dry soil, but her posture was different now, not rigid, not withdrawn, simply present. She moved toward the rows without waiting, her hands finding the work with less hesitation, and as the morning progressed, she noticed it again, the consistency, the way each action connected to the next without disruption, no sudden shifts, no unpredictable changes, everything held within a quiet structure that did not need to be explained to be understood. At one point, as the sun climbed higher, a shadow fell briefly across her path. She looked up, and there he was again, Jack, closer this time than before, not by much, but enough that the distance felt intentional rather than accidental. He adjusted something along the fence, his movements precise, then stepped back, his gaze passing over the area, not scanning for error, not searching for fault, simply observing. And for a moment, their eyes met, not long, not enough to carry meaning in the way words might, but long enough to register, and in that brief exchange, there was no discomfort, no need to look away immediately, only a neutral acknowledgement, as if two people occupying the same space had recognized each other's presence and nothing more was required. He gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, then returned to his task, and Anna found herself returning to hers without the hesitation that had marked every movement the day before. The moment passed, but it did not disappear, it settled somewhere beneath the surface, adding to the pattern she was beginning to understand. This place operated on something she had not expected, something that did not rely on force or display, something quieter, more controlled, and as the heat began to build again, rising steadily toward another long day, Anna realized that she was no longer waiting for something to go wrong, she was watching, learning, and that shift, small as it seemed, changed everything about how the day unfolded. The sun climbed faster that day, or at least it felt that way, the cool edge of morning disappearing before it could fully settle, replaced by heat that rose from the ground and pressed downward at the same time, enclosing everything in between. Anna worked without looking up for a while, her hands moving in a rhythm that no longer felt foreign, the repetition steady, almost grounding, but her awareness remained wide, taking in the small movements around her, the patterns that had begun to form into something she could follow, something she could anticipate, and it was in that awareness that she noticed the shift, not in the environment, not in the work itself, but in one of the others. A woman a few rows over, older, slower in her movements, her pace falling just slightly behind the rest, not enough to draw attention at first, but enough that it became visible over time. Anna saw the hesitation in her hands, the slight pause before each movement, the way her shoulders lowered just a fraction more with each passing minute, fatigue building quietly, without complaint, without acknowledgement. It was the kind of thing that might go unnoticed in a place driven by orders and output, the kind of thing that would eventually lead to correction, to pressure, to being told to keep up. But here, that moment unfolded differently. Jack was already nearby, not watching directly, not focused on her in any obvious way, but aware, always aware. He adjusted his position, moving along the fence line, then into the field itself, his path natural, unforced, as if he had always intended to be there. He passed behind the slower woman without stopping, without interrupting her work, but as he moved, he shifted the pace of the row beside her, subtly, almost invisibly, slowing his own movements just enough that the rhythm of the group adjusted with him, not by instruction, not by command, but by example. The others followed without realizing it, their timing aligning with his, the pressure easing without anyone having to acknowledge it. The woman's pace steadied, her movements no longer falling behind, and she did not have to ask, did not have to explain. Nothing had been pointed out, nothing had been corrected, and yet the outcome had changed completely. Anna watched this happen in real time, her hands slowing slightly as her attention fixed on the sequence of events. It was so precise, so controlled, that it almost felt deliberate in a way she could not fully explain. This was not just restraint, not just silence, this was awareness shaped into action, action that did not draw attention to itself, did not elevate the one who made it, it simply solved the problem and disappeared. And that was what struck her most, not the act itself, but the absence of recognition that followed. No one thanked him, no one looked at him differently, and he did not expect them to. He continued working as if nothing had happened, as if the adjustment had been part of the work all along, and Anna felt something settle more firmly inside her, a realization that had been forming since the moment she stepped off the truck now taking clearer shape. This kind of strength did not need acknowledgement because it was not performed for others, it existed whether it was seen or not, it functioned without requiring validation, and that made it something entirely different from what she had known before. She returned her focus to her own row, her movements aligning again with the rhythm around her, but her understanding had shifted, deepened, and for the first time, she was not just observing the difference, she was beginning to recognize its structure, its purpose, and the quiet intention behind it. By midday the heat had settled into everything again, the kind that did not just sit on the skin but pressed inward, slowing thought, stretching time, making every movement feel heavier than it was. Anna felt it in her shoulders, in the steady pull of her arms as she worked, but it no longer carried the same edge of resistance. She had adjusted, not fully, not comfortably, but enough that the rhythm held, and within that rhythm, her attention remained sharp, tracking the details that had begun to define this place for her. It was in those details that the next moment unfolded, small at first, almost easy to miss, a hat lifted briefly to wipe sweat from a brow, a sleeve rolled higher without pause in movement, ordinary actions that carried no meaning on their own, but together formed a pattern of control, of economy, nothing wasted, nothing exaggerated, and then, as if the day itself needed to test that pattern, a sudden shift came in the form of a loose section of fence along the far edge of the field, the wood slightly displaced, the wire slack where it should have been taut. It was not dramatic, not urgent, but it required attention. One of the cowboys moved toward it immediately, tools already in hand, his steps quick, purposeful, and for a moment, the pace of the work around him faltered, not because of confusion, but because attention followed movement. It was instinct, but before that shift could spread, before the focus of the entire field could be pulled toward a single point, Jack moved, not toward the fence, but along the line of workers, his presence cutting across the field in a way that redirected attention without interrupting it. He did not speak, did not signal, but his pace remained steady, unchanged, and the others followed, their movements aligning again, the rhythm restored without a word. The man at the fence worked alone, not isolated, but not observed, the task contained, the disruption limited, and that was the moment Anna understood something new. Something deeper than the patterns she had already begun to recognize. This was not just about restraint, not just about control of self, it was about control of environment, of focus, of how energy moved through a group without ever needing to be forced. Jack reached the edge of Anna's row, pausing just long enough to adjust the alignment of a crate that had shifted slightly out of place, his hand steady, precise. He corrected it with a single movement, then continued, no pause, no break in rhythm, and as he passed, Anna felt the awareness of his proximity, not intrusive, not overwhelming, just present, a measured distance maintained even in motion. She kept working, but her attention followed him for a moment longer, watching the way he moved through the space without disturbing it, how nothing about his presence demanded attention, and yet everything adjusted around it. The fence was repaired within minutes, the line restored, the work never truly stopped, and that was what remained with her, the absence of interruption, the way a problem had been addressed without becoming the center of everything, without pulling focus, without shifting the balance of the entire field. Anna returned her gaze to the row in front of her, her hands moving again with steady purpose, but her understanding had shifted once more, expanding beyond individual actions into something larger, something systemic. This place did not rely on reaction, it relied on anticipation, on quiet adjustments made before anything could become disruption, and that required a kind of awareness she had not expected, a kind of discipline that did not show itself openly, but shaped everything beneath the surface. And as the sun continued its slow climb, pressing the day toward its peak, Anna realized that what she had first seen as size, as physical difference, was only the outer layer of something far more structured, far more deliberate, something that could not be measured in inches or weight, but only in the way it held everything together without ever needing to prove that it could. The moment came without warning, not marked by any clear change in the air or the rhythm of work, but it settled into place as quietly as everything else had. Anna did not notice it at first, her hands moving steadily, her body aligned with the pace she had learned to follow, but something shifted inside her, something subtle, and it revealed itself in the smallest of actions. She reached for a crate that had been set slightly out of line, the wood angled just enough to interrupt the flow of movement along the row. Before, she might have worked around it, adjusted her own position to compensate, but this time she paused, just for a second, her hand resting on the edge of the crate, and she moved it. Not far, not dramatically, just enough to bring it back into alignment, the motion simple, efficient, unnoticed by anyone else, and then she continued, her hands returning to their rhythm without hesitation, and that was when she realized, the action had not been instinctive in the way it once would have been, it had been learned, absorbed from the patterns around her, from the way problems were addressed before they could grow, from the way adjustments were made without drawing attention. She did not look up immediately, but she was aware of the space around her, aware of how her movement fit into it, and for the first time, she was not just following the rhythm, she was contributing to it. The understanding that followed was quiet but clear. She had crossed something invisible, a line between observation and participation, and it changed the way everything felt. The work no longer seemed like something happening to her, it was something she was part of, something she could influence in small, precise ways. Later, as the sun held steady above them, refusing to give any sign of relief, another moment unfolded, one that confirmed what she had begun to sense, a tool left slightly out of place near the edge of the row, not in the way, not causing disruption yet, but close enough that it might. Anna saw it as she passed, her eyes catching the detail without effort, and this time she did not hesitate at all. She adjusted it, aligning it with the others, placing it where it belonged, and then she moved on, no pause, no acknowledgement, the action complete as soon as it was done, and as she continued working, she felt something settle more firmly inside her, a recognition not just of what she had seen, but of what she had become within this space. She had learned the structure, not through instruction, not through explanation, but through observation and repetition, through the quiet consistency of those around her, and that realization carried weight, not heavy, not burdensome, but grounding. She looked up briefly, her gaze moving across the field, and for a moment it found him again, Jack, standing near the far side, his posture unchanged, his movement steady, and there was no exchange, no signal, but something passed in that brief alignment of awareness, something that did not require words. She returned her attention to the work, but her perspective had shifted completely. She understood now that what she had once seen as something external, something separate from her, was in fact something she could carry, something she could replicate, the same quiet control, the same measured response, the same refusal to let disruption take hold. And as the day continued, stretching forward without urgency, she realized that the difference she had been trying to define was no longer something she was trying to understand from the outside. It was something she had begun to live from within, and that, more than anything else, marked the moment when everything truly changed. The heat reached its peak and held there, unmoving, as if the sky itself had decided that nothing below it would be allowed relief. The air no longer carried any trace of mourning, only weight, pressing down on shoulders, slowing breath, stretching every second into something longer than it should have been, and yet the work continued, not faster, not slower, just steady, unchanged. Anna felt it in her body, the fatigue building in a way that was no longer sharp but constant, a background presence she had learned to move through rather than resist. Her hands continued their rhythm, her movements aligned with the pattern she now understood, but her awareness had shifted again. It was no longer focused on learning, on observing, it had moved inward, measuring something within herself, testing whether what she had begun to understand could hold under pressure. And that was when the moment came, not from the environment, not from the others, but from within her own limits. Her grip slipped slightly on a bundle, not enough to drop it, but enough to break the rhythm she had maintained, a small disruption, but one that mattered. She paused, just for a fraction of a second, feeling the hesitation rise, the old instinct returning, the expectation of correction, of being seen, but nothing came. The field continued as it had before, the rhythm unbroken, no eyes turned toward her, no attention shifted, and in that absence, she was left with something new, the choice of how to respond without external pressure, without instruction. She adjusted her grip, slower this time, more deliberate, aligning the bundle with the others, correcting the motion before it could become a mistake. Then she continued, the rhythm returning, not forced, not rushed, just restored, and as she did, she realized that the structure she had been observing was no longer outside of her. It was guiding her actions from within, shaping her response without the need for anyone else to intervene, a quiet control that had been learned not through words, but through consistency, through example, through the absence of unnecessary force. She looked up briefly, her gaze moving across the field, not searching, just acknowledging, and she saw him again, Jack. At the far edge, his posture unchanged, his movements as steady as they had been from the beginning, and there was something different in the way she saw him now. Not as a figure to observe, not as something separate, but as part of the same structure she now understood herself to be within. He was not directing, not overseeing in any obvious way, and yet everything aligned around that presence, not because it had to, but because it made sense to, because it held, because it did not break under pressure. And that was when Anna understood the final piece, the thing that had been forming beneath every moment she had witnessed. This kind of strength was not about what you could do when you were in control. It was about what you chose to do when you were not being watched, when nothing required you to act, when the easier path would be to let something slip, to let the structure weaken just slightly, and still, you held it, you maintained it, not for recognition, not for reward, but Because that was who you had decided to be within that space, she returned her attention to the work, her hands steady, her movements precise, and for the first time, there was no question, no uncertainty about how she would respond. The pattern held, not because it was enforced, but because it had been understood, and as the sun remained fixed above them, unyielding, she realized that whatever had felt overwhelming when she first arrived had transformed into something else entirely, something she could carry, something that would remain long after this place, long after this moment, something that no longer depended on where she stood, but on how she chose to stand within it. The shift into evening began almost imperceptibly, the light softening at the edges, the sharpness of the day giving way to something quieter, something that no longer demanded the same effort to endure. Anna felt it before she saw it, the subtle easing in the air, the way her breath no longer felt as heavy, and with it came a different kind of awareness, not focused on movement, not on maintaining rhythm, but on what remained after the effort had been sustained. The field stretched out before her, no longer harsh, no longer overwhelming, just present, defined by the lines they had worked, by the order they had maintained. And for a moment, she stood still, not because she needed rest, but because she recognized something she had not allowed herself to notice before. The work was complete, not in the sense that there was nothing left to do, but in the sense that what had been done held its shape, nothing undone, nothing left disordered, everything where it belonged, and that realization carried a weight that was not physical, but internal. She turned slightly, her gaze moving across the field, and she saw the others, their movement slower now, but still aligned, still within the same structure that had carried them through the day. No one rushed to leave, no one broke from the pattern abruptly. It ended the same way it had begun, without noise, without declaration, and that consistency, from beginning to end, settled something in her that she had not known was unsettled. Near the fence, Jack stood again, not watching in any obvious way, not overseeing, just present within the space, his hands resting lightly on the top rail, his posture unchanged, and Anna realized that this had been constant, not just throughout the day, but throughout everything she had observed. Nothing about him had shifted in response to difficulty, to ease, to anything external. The same control, the same restraint, the same quiet presence had remained, and that was when she understood the final distinction. It was not just about how he acted, it was about how he did not need to change in order to maintain that action. It was consistent because it was not dependent on circumstance, and that kind of consistency created something else entirely, something stable, something others could align with without being told to do so. She looked back at the rows, at the small adjustments she herself had made, the crate she had aligned, the tool she had repositioned, the rhythm she had held even when it would have been easier to let it slip, and she saw it now, clearly. She had not been following him, she had been following the structure he represented, the same structure that now existed within her own actions, not perfectly, not fully formed, but present, real, and capable of holding. The truck engine started again in the distance, low and steady, signaling the close of the day. But Anna did not move immediately. She allowed the moment to settle, to take shape fully before she stepped away from it, because she understood now that this was not something that belonged only to this place. It was something that could be carried beyond it, something that did not require this field, this heat, or these circumstances to exist. It only required the same choice, the same quiet discipline, the same refusal to let chaos define the space around her. She turned then, walking toward the truck with the others, her step steady, her posture unchanged, but something within her had shifted completely, and as she climbed up, the last light of the day fading behind the horizon, she realized that what she had once measured in size, in presence, in outward strength, had been replaced by something far more enduring, something that could not be seen at a glance, but once understood, could never be unlearned. That night the barracks felt different, not quieter, not more comfortable, but steadier, as if something invisible had settled into place. Anna sat on the edge of her bunk again, her hands resting loosely, no longer carrying the same tension that had been there on the first night. The air was still warm, holding on to the heat of the day, but it did not press against her in the same way. It simply existed, like everything else in this place, without urgency. Around her, the others moved through their routines, some sitting, some lying back, a few speaking in low voices that did not carry far, and for the first time, Anna noticed that even these small movements followed a kind of quiet order, not imposed, not structured by rules, but shaped by awareness of space, of each other. no one interrupted, no one pushed beyond what was needed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, the same pattern she had seen in the field now. Present even here, in a place without work, without pressure, and that realization held her attention, because it meant something deeper than she had first understood. It meant that what she had witnessed was not limited to a task or a role, it was something carried within the people themselves, something that did not change when the environment changed. She leaned back slightly, her gaze moving toward the small window. The night outside stretching wide and open, the sky clear, scattered with stars that seemed closer here, more defined against the darkness, and she thought of the day again, not in fragments this time, but as a whole, from the moment the truck had arrived to the final light fading across the field, every part of it connected by the same quiet consistency, nothing forced, nothing exaggerated, everything held together by choices made without announcement, and she understood now that this had been the lesson. Not something spoken, not something taught directly, but something shown through repetition, through example, through the absence of everything she had expected to find. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to hold on to that understanding, to test it, to see if it remained when the day was no longer in front of her, and it did, unchanged, steady, and that was when the final shift took place, not something sudden, not dramatic, but complete. She no longer felt like someone observing a different world, she felt like someone who had stepped into a structure she could carry with her, something that did not depend on where she was or who was around her, only on how she chose to act within it. She opened her eyes again, the room the same as before, nothing altered, and yet everything had changed. She reached for a small piece of paper she had kept hidden among her belongings, a habit from before, something she had held onto without knowing why, and she began to write. Her hand steady, the words forming slowly, carefully, not rushed, not forced. She did not write about the heat, or the work, or even the land itself. She wrote about what she had seen, what she had come to understand, about the way strength could exist without noise, about the way control could be maintained without force, about the way a presence could shape everything around it without ever demanding attention. And when she finished, she paused, reading the words once, not to correct them, but to recognize them, to see clearly what had changed within her. Then she folded the paper, placing it back where it belonged, not as something to hide, but as something to keep, something to carry forward. And as she lay back on the bunk, the quiet of the room settling around her, she knew that whatever came next, whatever place she found herself in, this would remain, not as a memory, but as a way of seeing, a way of choosing, a way of holding the world steady even when nothing else was. The next morning arrived the same way as before, light slipping quietly through the window, the air still carrying that brief, fragile coolness before the heat would return. But something had changed in the way Anna met it. She did not pause on the edge of uncertainty, she did not measure what might happen before stepping into the day. She stood, steady, her movements unhurried but certain. As if the rhythm she had learned no longer belonged to the place, but to her. Outside, the land stretched wide as it always had, the same fences, the same endless rows, the same figures already moving through the work, but it no longer felt distant, it felt defined, something she understood without needing to study it. She climbed into the truck with the others, her posture unchanged, her gaze no longer lowered out of instinct, but held at a natural level, aware without searching. And when they arrived, she stepped down into the dust with the same measured pace she had seen, not imitating, not copying, but carrying it in her own way. The work began as it always did, without announcement, without instruction, but this time, she did not wait to follow, she moved with it, her hands finding their place, her movements aligning not because she was adjusting, but because she already knew where they belonged. The hours passed, the heat rising, the weight of the day pressing in, but it did not break the rhythm, not hers, not the field's. And when small disruptions appeared, as they always did, a crate slightly misaligned, a tool set just out of reach, a moment where the pace could falter, she responded without hesitation, not drawing attention, not seeking approval, simply correcting, restoring, continuing. And in those moments, she no longer felt separate from what was happening around her. She was part of the structure that held it together. She looked up once, briefly, and saw Jack at the far side of the field, unchanged, steady as he had been from the beginning. And there was no need to watch him now, no need to measure or interpret, because what he represented was no longer something outside of her understanding, it was something she carried within her own. Actions, the day moved forward, the sun climbed, the work continued, and everything held, not because it was controlled from above, but because each part of it, each person within it, chose to maintain it, quietly, consistently, without display, and as the light began to shift again toward evening, Anna realized that the difference she had once tried to define no longer needed words, it had become something lived, something practiced in every small decision, every measured movement, every moment where she chose control over reaction, presence over fear, and as she stood there, the field stretching out before her, the structure intact, the rhythm unbroken, she understood with complete clarity that what she had once seen as something larger than herself had never been about size at all, it had been about standard, about the quiet decision to hold oneself steady regardless of the circumstances. And that was something no distance, no past, no war could take away, because it did not belong to a place or a person, it belonged to the choice itself, the choice to remain measured, to remain aware, to remain human in a way that did not need to announce itself to be real, and in that understanding, the world around her no longer felt unfamiliar, it felt ordered, not by force, but by the quiet strength of those who chose to hold it that way.